You are today, and welcome to our second Leading Edge workshop. I am doing all the fun technical behind the scenes stuff right now as the team is getting everyone in. All right, and Chelsea, I see the recording button. Great job. That's always our fear, right? That we start one of these and one of us doesn't hit the record button. So good job, Chelsea. We appreciate it. All right, so let's jump in and get started. I'm so excited to have you guys here. This is a fun workshop. I do this workshop in one of our programs, Epic Leaders, and it's always a class favorite. And so I was excited to share it with you guys today and allow you guys to think about how you can use more influential conversations throughout your day. So, all right. So my first question for you guys, and go ahead and open up your chat because we're going to do lots of fun stuff in the chat today. And if you need the workbook, let us know. Chelsea and Jen can drop the link in there for you, and it's interactive. So my first question for you today, drop it in the chat. Is this your first leading edge this year or your second leading edge class this year? Give me a 1 or a 2. And all right. Oh, look at all these 2s. Fantastic. And a lot of 1s. And if this is your first one, we are excited to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit about yesterday and close our behavior change loop. So stay with us with that through that. It'll just be a few minutes. And hopefully it'll encourage you to watch the replay link that came out yesterday afternoon. All right, for those of you who I don't know yet or have not met yet, and hopefully we will meet soon, I'm Jen Thornton. I am the owner and founder of 304 Coaching. And what's most important about 304 is we have an incredible team. All of these women here are fantastic, and every single one of them touched leading edge in some way to make sure that this program was exciting, interactive, and easy to attend. So as always, I couldn't do it without this great team. So thank you guys so much. And Chelsea and Jen are on here today in the chat to help you with any questions you may have or help you with the workbook. All right, so if this is your first leading edge workshop, what you can expect is a fast-paced learning environment. We move fast. You'll get the recording afterwards. So if there's something you missed or something you want to go back and look at, not a problem. You'll have those recordings through the end of May and access to those. You're going to get tools to grow your competencies and develop skills. And it's important that you think of both of those. You're also going to get self-coaching questions, which are incredibly important. We have to do the mental work if we want to create true behavior change. And you're going to get implementation steps. Because again, if you want to create behavior change, you've got to do the full cycle of work. Too often we go to one of these webinars, we find some great ideas, and we do nothing with them. I hope through this series, by the time you end this next Wednesday, you have all kinds of new tools in your toolbox that you're actually using, and it's actually making a difference for you and your team. And remember, we are doing some e-learning, so we have to stay active. No falling asleep here. Stay active in the chat box. I've got a lot of questions for you today, and I hope that we'll have a lot of examples from Wednesday's class that people will be sharing today, and that you can kind of get an idea of what it's like to learn in a group. Just because we're in a webinar and you may be by yourself, though I do know that we have a couple of companies who have rooms full of people on right now, but some of you may be by yourself. And I really want you to make sure that you're still getting that experience of learning with others. So we'll do that through the chat box today. Bernice needs access to the workbook. Chelsea or Jen, could you drop that in the chat for her so she can download it before we get started? All right, so the philosophy of 304 coaching is we're all about behavior change here. And remember, to create behavior change, we have to develop our competencies, we have to learn new skills, we have to think about the mental work. Why is it worth doing the work, right? Why is it worth changing? What's possible for us if we change? And this helps you actually create some new neural pathways and starts to rewrite some of your old habits, but you've got to do the mental work to do that. And then again, the only way we'll create that habit and really create those new pathways is by actually using these materials and thinking about how to think about them in a real life situation. All right, so we're going to close that loop we just talked about, because last Wednesday in session 1, we talked about competencies and skills, and we talked about what you could do with it. And I gave you guys some challenges to think about how do you start to work with these materials. And there was things I wanted you to do, hopefully within the first 24 hours of learning them. So let's check in on you guys. So what we talked about was your mind is your map. And when you think about your experiences in your life, your mind only knows what you have experienced, whether that's physical experience or read or a conversation. And that is your map to the world, right? Your experiences. But what's important is that we really think about how to consistently expand that mind map and really think about that space outside of your mind, right? And we talked about how uncomfortable that new space is because it's different. You know, it was like that video game. You leveled up and you were really good at one level and you leveled up, and now you're like, it's hard. And as humans, we can contract and go back down to that old level, or we can recognize that all that's happening is fear and a chemical reaction in that new space. And we can start to push through it and see what's possible for us. All right. And we talked about 6 different ways to do that. And when you think about expanding your mind map, we talked about embracing imperfections. We talked about never becoming a master. We talked about getting curious, and I gave you a whole list of great questions to get curious around discovering innovation. We talked about managing our thoughts, because don't forget, your brain believes what you tell it. We talked a lot about what could go right and also what else could be true. So when you think about this list, for those of you who were on our first session, which one of these, you can give us a number, did you try first? Which one of these have you tried since we met with you on Wednesday? All right, so we've got a lot of 5s, 4, 6s, 4. My gosh, fantastic. So all different ones, 4, 5, fantastic, good. All right, so it looks like 4, 5, and 6 might be the most popular ones. I love that. And don't forget to try some of the others, especially around getting curious. And these workshops are going to build on each other. Some of the stuff we talked about on Wednesday, we're going to try to bring that back in today, and we'll definitely be bringing it back in Wednesday. Oh, and we have 2 number 1s, embracing imperfections. I know that's one I worked on a lot. I'm getting better at it, but it's something I worked on quite a bit over the last couple of years of my life. All right, you also got your self-coaching worksheet that matched the mental work needed to really think about creating those new neural pathways using these new techniques to recognize that fear is only a chemical reaction. So I hope that all of you did that. And then we also asked you to implement this, do something. And if you have an example, throw it in the chat. I'd love to hear examples of how you might have already used this, these 6 steps or these six techniques. And after our workshop for the 2 days after, I was getting emails from people saying that, you know, they had a new leader and what could go right was important to them. I had people talk about they're going to do a postmortem to a big project and they're going to change the way they thought about it so that the team really sees what's possible. So if you have an idea of how you use one of these, drop it in the chat. It'll take a few minutes for it to come through. But what I want is you guys to be able to see all the different ideas of how we're starting to use this. And then remember, if you want new information to stick with you, you have to reteach. Tell someone else about this. Oh my gosh, so some of the questions are already coming in. Carrie had a Teams chat with other colleagues that participated in the session to share the takeaways. Oh my gosh, Carrie, that was so smart. I love that you did that. Fantastic. Deborah, what could go right and what are the steps to see that success? Yeah, and remember, what could go right and what could go wrong? It's kind of the same work. It's just a really big switch and how the chemicals start to fire off in your head so that you can see what's possible instead of forcing fear chemicals into your brain. The Ledge team had a meeting after too. Fantastic, Elizabeth. I'm so glad that you bribed everyone for lunch, and they're all sitting in a room with you again today. So many great ideas. All right, so I love that you guys are already implementing. And again, that's how we create behavior change. We have to do all the work. We can't just do some of it, or we will not create those new neuro pathways. They just won't happen, right? We have to stay focused in that. All right, so congratulations on all of you that have now started to close the true behavior change loop. And we're going to start that loop again today with all of you on the class. And so what's important to know is we're going to learn new competencies and skills. And as a reminder, skills are actions. They're like, this is how you do it, right? Step one, step two. We're going to do very processed work today to teach a new skill. And that's a piece of it, right? You have to have a skill. But as you're growing skills, you're also growing competencies. And remember, competencies are those kind of those softer skills, or those kind of more abstract skills that are hard sometimes to put language to, but you use them over a myriad of your actions. And it's important to know what competencies are needed for your role in any role that you're in. And today I could have listed a million different competencies that we'd be working on, because influential leadership is so critically important in today's world. But some of the key ones we are going to talk about is leading change, leading projects and programs. And under that comes managing resources. As leaders, I don't think we think about the competency of managing resources enough. Every single thing is a resource. Your talent, your budget, your supplies, your product, everything is a resource. And you're constantly negotiating those resources, because resources are not ever ending. No matter how your company's doing, or no matter what is going on, there are limits to the resources. So learning how to influence and navigate resource management is so key to success in leadership. So you're going to be able to start to think about that during this module. And then leading organizations. And everyone on this call has been leading organizations, right? We all are leaders in some way. Even if we don't necessarily have someone reporting to us, we are leading our organization. Everyone is a leader. Everyone touches the company. And so we're going to think about delivering on strategy, collaboration, and building and promoting partnerships. So much to go through today. I'm excited for you guys. All right, so now let's think about those skills we're going to learn. So we're going to learn about best possible outcomes for high-stake meetings. We can influence in the moment, and then sometimes we have to go through really intense planning, which is the process we're going to go through today. You're going to have a continuum of different types of conversations, but we want to really think about some high-stake conversations today. You're going to learn about what communication approach works for different situations, and that's key to success. We're going to plan and rehearse conversations. I wish we had time to actually rehearse and play and, practice some of this great stuff. But we're going to go through the process, and then I hope you find a buddy that's in this program, a study buddy, and you can practice some of it one-on-one. And then we're going to turn difficult situations into powerful opportunities. Think about some of the negotiations you have to do, right? What if you looked at those tough negotiations as powerful opportunities? And again, that's really changing the way our chemicals in our brains think about some of these high-stake conversations. All right, so are you guys ready to get started and actually start some learning? I am. Woohoo! All right, so our friend Ken Blanchard, I think all of us have heard of Ken Blanchard in our life. He is, an iconic educator, leadership educator. And one of his great quotes is, "The key to successful leadership is influence, not authority." That's a big one, guys, because as leaders, oftentimes we roll through authority. We're the boss, right? And it's really easy to do that, but I could spend 2 hours talking to you about what could go wrong. Not that we want to talk about what could go wrong, but truly what could go wrong when you lead by authority, because it really shuts down truth and communication and ideas and innovation. And so today we want to talk about influence, because that opens up truth telling. It opens up conversations. It opens up the ideas and collaboration, right? But when you're telling people stuff, None of that's there because it's all push. There's no pull of information. And so let's think back very briefly to 2020, right? Tough year. No one on this call could probably say anything other than that. But what I saw in 2020 is that we had to do a lot of crisis management, and it made sense. Crisis management sounds like buildings on fire, get out. No questions, no collaborations, just do it. And we had to do that early 2020. And literally, we were telling people, get out of the office, get home, get safe. I mean, we were actually saying those words to people. But what happened is we stayed in crisis management. Many of us did, because we stayed in this constant state of fear of the unknown. And so as we stayed in this crisis management, what was happening in our brain is we were creating these new neural pathways, a habit, right? From point A to point B, everything's directive, it's directive, it's directive. And it came from our own personal fear, our own personal styles. But unfortunately, I saw people who were never directive leaders become highly directive leaders by the end of the year because of their habits. So if you're on this call and you're willing to do a little admit about some of your 2020 stress or 2020 fear, do you think you were probably more directive than you needed to be in some situations because of that fear? And maybe you created some habits around being highly directive. So if that could be you, even a smidge, put yes in the comments, because come on, guys, I know I am part of that. So absolutely right. Yeah, Leslie, you had a job change in the middle of 2020. Oh my gosh, can you imagine all the stress? So a lot of yeses, right? And so we have to rewrite and really think about influential leadership. And it's important to think about it because it's really the way of the future. When you think about how we're going to lead now and how we're going to lead as we go on, directive leadership worked in the Industrial Revolution. It doesn't work in today's times, and we have to be influencers. All right, so to be an influencer, oh, fear took over at various points, Dana. Oh my gosh, yeah, everyone. If someone didn't say yes to that in 2020, I don't know if you're human, right? We are all human, and sometimes our executives were the most, burdened with stress, right? They had to think about how to keep their business alive. Many of you had that problem on your plate, how to keep your employees safe. So fear definitely kicked in. All right, so if we're going to influence, how do we do that? How do we think about that? And so I'm going to show you a process, and you're going to think, wow, these are a lot of questions. This might be a lot of work, but there's a reason why I'm showing you this process, because as you build this process, you're going to get better at it. You're going to get faster at it. It's going to become more natural to you. You probably won't have to use the worksheets as much, but in the beginning, it's okay to use them, and definitely are going to want to see that. All right. So to create an influential conversation, the first thing we're going to do is set a clear, measurable goal. We're going to assess the situation. We're going to choose the right appeal. So important. We're going to structure the approach. We're going to try to plan for the unforeseen. Not always easy, because if we could see it, we would plan for it, but we have to stop and use that piece of it and plan for the unforeseen. We're going to rehearse, and I'm going to talk to you a lot about the opening line, because there's nothing more important in this situation than your opening line. And then we're going to debrief. All right, so here's what I want you guys all to do. I want you to think about a conversation that you need to have maybe this week or early next week, but think of a conversation that's important to you right now. Because as we go through these steps today, I want you to use that conversation as kind of your practice. And we're going to think about, how do you use these tools to really have an incredible outcome in that high stake, important conversation? So, all right, so everyone think, what's that idea? What's that important conversation that's coming up that maybe kind of gives you a little bit of fear, a little bit of belly, ache, a little butterfly going on in there? All right, does everyone have an idea of a conversation they need to have? If so, just throw me a little yes in the chat box. And if anyone wants to throw out what the actual conversation topic is, you're more than welcome to do that too. Okay, and you may be thinking of a whole list of conversations, and that's all right too. So good. Okay, great. I'm glad you guys have some ideas of what you want to work on today. All right, so the first step in this is set clear and measurable goals, and that's page 18 of your workbook. So here's what I think is funny. When I'm working with clients and we think about coaching them through a high stake conversation, my first question is always at the end of this conversation, what do you want to happen? And they're like, I don't know. We get so worked up about starting the conversation that we actually never decide what we want from the conversation. And that's actually where we have to start. Think of these conversations as small loops, right? Where you want to end is where you have to start. So if you want to have a really great outcome in a high stake conversation, the first thing you have to get clear on is, what do you want to achieve? Maybe what do you want this person to do, say, think, or feel differently, depending on the conversation, because we could list out a million different ones. Or what's the business objective that we reached if you're able to influence someone? Say, we talked about managing resources early in our time today. Say that you have an idea of something and it's going to take a financial investment, but you really see the outcome, the business outcome of it. Maybe you have to influence to get those resources, but really thinking about what it could mean. What's the impact for the company? And thinking about that would really help you start these conversations. So in the conversation that you have in your head right now, I want you to think about, what's the outcome? What's the end? We're going to start with the end. What do you want to happen? So spend a minute or two, not a minute or two, second or two thinking about that. And I think that's important. And Diana, you have to get a budget approved and a scholarship in particular. Okay, so we're going to be thinking about that with you, Diana. So really, that's a managing resources, right? Really thinking about how to get the scholarship approved, because it impacts resources. And as leaders, we have to manage those all day, every day. All right, so what do we do next? Now we know what the end looks like. So now I'm going to take you back to the beginning and we're going to assess the situation. And so on page 19, you have a lot of questions to think about. And when you go through them, some of them will apply to your current situation, some won't, but there's questions that you'll use throughout your process of really getting familiar with influential conversations. At times you will use many or any of these. So when you're thinking about assessing the situation, think about what will motivate that other person in the situation. So if we go back to getting the scholarship approved, that could be an emotional achievement, or someone, that, wants to really give back to the community. It would allow them to give back to the community, right? You have to think about what's in it for that person. What reasons might influence them, and really thinking about your audience. And we don't do enough about thinking about our audiences. We're so wrapped up in worry, right? We're so wrapped up in fear. Remember, as fear goes up, the ability for your prefrontal cortex to think strategically goes down, right? So it's kind of doing this, right? But we want to get the fear up and the strategy, or the fear down and the strategy up. And so really think about what might influence them. And then maybe at times there could be incentives or offers, especially if you're negotiating. Really think about your negotiation power. What can you take away or apply pressure? And that sounds a little direct, right? But sometimes we're in a compliance situation. We're influencing, but at the end of the day, there's a compliance situation. They are going to have to get on board, right? But we're going to start with influence to get them there. And sometimes that means we have to apply a little pressure. And that could be, if your competencies don't develop, this could be, a result of a performance plan or something like that. What are their primary interests? What are their concerns in that situation? And how can you address their key interests, their concerns, their frustration, before you bring up your own, right? We do this too in conversation, especially in high stakes. We're going to go in and we're going to tell them how we're going to do it. And we're going to tell them what we want. That is so directive. It's so old school. It doesn't work. If you really think about influencing, you're going in, you let them know why you're there, and then you start to very early hear and listen from them. If you listen to negotiators, I love the mastermind. I can't think of the gentleman's name, but in masterclass, there's a gentleman who teaches negotiation. And he's always talking about, really letting them kind of talk through their needs, right? So that you can address those. So very similar here. Oh, Chris Voss. There you go. All right. Oh my gosh. So everyone knows Chris Voss. I'm so glad that we were able to answer that. Good job, guys. See, you will never have all the answers, but collectively we will always have them together. And I truly believe that. And all of you guys just proved that to me today. So we also want to think about what points are we open to their ideas? What points are you not willing to be flexible? And here's something that's really important. What should you not say or do? Because it could escalate, distract, or upset someone. Now, I'm going to put a little asterisk on that, a little extra something. Don't ever walk away from telling the truth. We don't tell the truth enough in the workplace. I could give you example after example after example of a collective group of people who knew the right answer, and an executive was so strong in their opinions, the team let them drive the bus off the cliff because they were too scared to tell the truth. We've got to create environments where people tell the truth, whether it's popular or not popular. But be sure you think about what not to say or how to say it. But again, never walk away from truth telling in the business setting. It could impact businesses by millions and millions of dollars. Has anyone ever been afraid to tell the truth to their boss, knowing that if you told the truth, you could prevent something, but you still didn't say it because you were like, oh, they're not going to like the truth. I'm just going to keep it to myself. And you knew where it was going. I can say yes to that. Yeah. So, oh, yeah, absolutely. And if you can create an environment where people truth telling, your business will skyrocket because people know what to do, right? But we're not willing to always listen to it. So leadership change, so fear takes over. Yeah, right. So especially if there's a new leader or a leader has a pet project they're really passionate about and they're very determined to think about it in their way, then the team doesn't always tell them the truth. All right. So now we know our outcome. We started at the end, then we went back to the beginning and we assessed the situation. Now we got to figure out the middle, right? And this is choosing the right appeal. And this is important. And on page 20, I gave you a whole list of examples, and we're going to kind of go through those because there's intellectual, compliance, commitment, inspire, finding common ground. There's a whole bunch of different approaches you could take, and it's important to think about which one is going to be important. So let's look at each of these. And when you think of the situation that you've got in your head right now, the one you're working through as we go through this, if this is the pill you think is right, whenever it comes up, I just want you to say, this is my match in the chat box, okay? All right, so intellectual agreement. When do you use this? So sometimes I think it's really good in change management because if you appeal to people's intellectual knowledge around business and you tell them why, sometimes change management is really good with the intellectual agreement. Most people try to throw in inspire, and I think inspire and intellection could go hand in hand, but intellection is actually really good for change management. New projects that the team has to get behind, even if they're not necessarily excited about it. We've all had those, but they're important to do. Maybe when you're working with someone that has a really technical communication style, when you approach them, use intellection because you're meeting them where they are, and that's important. When you're discussing budgets and finance, so Diana's example that she gave us a little while ago might be good for an intellectual agreement. And when details and facts are an important part of the decision process. And so if you are influencing someone, but you're, as you work through the outcome, the budget's important or numbers are important, or you're trying to decide what marketing plan to go with, that's a great time to use an election because we have to think about the facts. All right, this could be one component of my appeal. Very good, Jen. Yes, it definitely could. So if anyone else thinks they may use this for their mystery, you can say, that's mine, or I've got this one in the chat. All right, what about a compelling argument, right? How do we compel people? So again, change management is good with that. New projects. And then also times when things can be emotion and emotion can play into it. And so compelling people to really think about it and what if, and I know this might be difficult for you right now, but could you think of it on the other side, right? That's a compelling approach, getting people to think about things on the other side. And sometimes when it's emotional, that's something you have to do. You have to think about the other side of the work. When talking to groups and teams, so sometimes you're influencing individuals, sometimes you're influencing groups. And so sometimes we have to think about compelling an entire group. And then when engagement and team collaboration is important. And so if you're getting people to get excited about a new project and collaboration is important, then compelling everyone to jump in and work together is important to think about. All right, so then Jen's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is it, right? And you can combine appeals, and we're going to talk about that. They don't necessarily stand by themselves. They like to have friends. You can bring some of these together. Does anyone else think that they may use a compelling agreement in their situation? All right, so the other one you could try is compliance. And this is when you assert yourself into compliance, because that does happen. I would love to say that you could influence your way through every conversation, through every day of your career, but I'd probably be lying to you, and I don't want to do that. So sometimes you do have to assert yourself into compliance. And again, this is good for performance management concerns, where you have to have some honest conversations around performance. It's also good in crisis management. You'll only see crisis management on this appeal. When we're influencing, we have to think about moving outside of directiveness, but compliance and assertion can feel directive. Then there's compliance, and there's a little negotiation in that. And this one's used, I think, often. I think this is probably one of the most commonly used one. So this is good when you're working through difficult partnerships or relationships. Anyone ever have a tough relationship with someone at work that you had to work with? Ever happened to anyone out there? Put a yes if that's happened. Oh, Jessica said this is yours. Okay, so this is Jessica's. When high stake conversations and each side has to compromise, that happens a lot, right? Sometimes everyone in the situation will have to compromise something, and you have to negotiate through that and know that going in so you can kind of plan for that. When you're negotiating a difficult contract, and that happens a lot, right? Especially if you're managing resources. And if you're managing tight or limited resources, oftentimes, there's a pool of something and every department wants a piece of it. And you have to kind of negotiate, but at the end of the day, the budget has to be compliant, right? So it's kind of a negotiation compliant combination. So, all right. So a lot of people said that this one might be one they use often. All right, good. Let's talk about commitment. This could be in a difficult or emotional situation where someone necessarily doesn't want to get on board or isn't enjoying the change management or is struggling. Sometimes you want to influence them, but at the end of the day, you have to influence into a commitment. And so you want to structure that a little different. When managing teams or people that are struggling to collaborate, sometimes you have to step in, right, and influence the team to work together. But at the end of the day, that team has to commit to what the end of that conversation. And when there's clear commitments that must be made by each party. And often you use commitment to close out your influential conversation. So this one gets used a lot, often towards the end. And right before you state kind of well, I'm glad we were here to talk about X, right? That opening statement. Oftentimes commitment comes towards the end of that loop. All right, so when you think about the conversation that's in your head right now, if you think you'll have to have a commitment, a firm commitment of resources or change or a different way of thinking or working, if you know that your conversation will have commitment in it, just put a yes or commitment in there. Oh, Amy, what happens when people change their mind after the commitment is made? Start back from square one? So it depends, right? Great question, Amy. Sometimes you do have to go back and do some reminders, but then you might want to change your approach. If you went into a compelling and made a commitment and they didn't do it, you may have to start then the next conversation with compliance and then that commitment. And so it's the same maybe conversation, but you're approaching it a different way. That's a really great question, Amy. Any other questions you guys have, throw them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as we go. And remember, at the end of today, we'll save a few minutes towards the end to answer questions. All right. And then there's the inspire. And gosh, wouldn't it be great if all we ever did was inspire and everyone just did what they wanted to? And there was rainbows and butterflies all around the workplace. Wouldn't that be fantastic? I don't know if it'd be called work. But oftentimes we do have to inspire, especially if you are at the VP executive. If you're on this call and you're at a high executive level, you know that inspiring the company's message and mission is incredibly important. So that everyone knows what direction they're going in and they know why. And this is really important. Brooke, inspire is my jam. Right, good. And Jen will definitely be your primary. I love, Jen, that you just keep changing because you're just like, I'm going to do them all. And I know you well enough to know that you'll figure out how to do them all. It's fantastic. So when you aspire, you're looking to communicate new vision or goals. Again, change management. When you're in change management, and let's face it, 2021 is basically change management. You're going to use a combination of a lot of these depending on the situation. When everyone will win from the outcome. And there are times that everyone will win from the outcome. And so you're influencing people, but you're inspiring them because the win is so good. And when you're talking with groups and teams, inspire sometimes works really well. You could inspire the group and then have influential conversations in pods or as individuals and really think about how to structure that, all those conversations together. That could be really powerful instead of just kind of haphazardly taken after them. Like really think about your entire structure of your conversations. And when you need buy-in from key stakeholders or really for long-term initiatives. I don't think we think about long-term initiatives enough around influence. If there's a project that's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the making, or it's really going to be a lot of lifting from change management, those long-term initiatives, you've got to inspire people. Right? They have to be inspired to get on the road with you. And then once they're on the road, you'll have different types of conversations. All right. Does anyone want to have some inspiring conversations with your team and influence through aspiration? If you were part of Leading Edge 2020, we did an aspiration exercise, which I love, made me think of that. You know, think of 50 things you aspire to in your entire life to do, which is always fun. All right. And then I think the last one we have on the list is finding common ground. You'll use this one a lot too. And so when you need someone to agree with your position, you know what, you're going to find common ground. It might be, you know, given a little and taken a little. When you need to gain momentum on ideas or when you're working cross-functionally, that's important. Think about some of these big collaborative projects that you work on or your team works on. Everyone has to find common ground. And then sometimes repairing damaged relationships. That happens, right? We have relationships that sometimes we damage or someone else damages or somewhere there's some damaged relationship, but we still have to work together. So wouldn't it be great to have a common ground conversation so then you can start to rebuild that? Too often we think we can rebuild from where we started, but typically we have to rebuild from a common ground and how we're going to work together and then build trust over time. And so sometimes it's a common ground. Does anyone need to have a common ground conversation with someone they work with, or maybe someone in their life, maybe a friend or a spouse or, you know, a sibling? I don't know. My sibling is actually on here. So hello, Bryce. My brother joined us today. I saw him jump on. Oh, and so is my cousin Amber. So hello to the family who jumped on today. Oh, and there's opportunistic. When you see an opportunity to take a new project, I love this one. This one is so fun because so often we'll be sitting in a meeting and we'll be like, oh, I really want to take that project on. I really could do that. Man, if I could do that, I know I can move my career forward, or I know I can make an impact. And we don't know really what to do, right? You know, is someone going to ask me, or, you know, what's going to happen? Take that opportunity, influence the ability to take that opportunity and take on that project. And so it's really good to use this approach when there's something new you want to take on and you know you can make a difference with it, and you can use this approach to get that project and get that experience under your belt. Collect experiences. When young people in their career say, you know, what should I know early in my career? The thing I always tell them is collect experiences. And this is a great way to do it. All right. So that was a long list. Hopefully you guys got some ideas of how to think about this conversation that's in your head right now that you need to have. So we know our end. We know we've assessed the situation. We've thought about our approach. Now we have to structure it all, right? We have to come in and bring it all together. And this is on page 23. So when you think about it, the thing I think is most important is the opening line. And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. That is the most important thing, right? We have to have a great opening line, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's part of structuring your approach. What are you open to giving the appeal, thinking about how you might approach that opening statement based on the appeal you've approached or you've picked. Then the other thing you want to think about is what will you say or show that you've heard or acknowledged their issues, right? So when you're thinking about structuring this, think about them first and you second. Think about them first, you second, and the outcome third. Because I know you'll have a better chance of getting to that outcome if you think of that other person first. Think about what questions you could ask to fully understand the other person's position. We talked about that yesterday or Wednesday. We talked about if you want to be a great leader and expand your mind map, you have to get curious. So part of your approach should be questions, because it allows that person to come into that conversation thinking versus just absorbing whatever you're going to tell them. And again, if you're just there to tell them something, you're just directing, you're not influencing. So questions start to open that conversation up. And then really think about what you think this person may or may not respond to. Hopefully you know the person well enough to kind of think about that. Always think about the concerns that person may have and what you can do to set this meeting up so it's comfortable. And I don't think we think about that enough, right? So oftentimes we're in big open workspaces. And so there's this, known assumption if you get pulled into that one office, you're going to get a talking to, right? Everyone has those cultures. So there's that one place. So make sure when you think about, Samantha's like, yes, Samantha knows where that place is. Not that you've been there, Samantha, you just know that other people have gone there. But we have to really think about how to make this person physically comfortable. Because remember, as a leader, one of your main priorities is to reduce fear. And if you're having an influential conversation with someone on your team, their fear is going to go up naturally, right? They're like, why am I here? What's going on? Am I in trouble? What's right? So getting them physically comfortable is important and a really big piece of this step. So think about where you want to take them. All right, plan for the unforeseen. And this is on page 24. So what might come up that you didn't plan for? I tell this story every time I teach this class. I'll tell it really quick here. No joke. I was negotiating with an executive in China a few years ago, and it was a several-day negotiation. He got on an airplane and he left the country in the middle of the negotiation. I did not plan for that. That was definitely unforeseen. And so, yeah, I got stuck in Shanghai for a few days, and I had to influence him to fly back to the country to finish. So believe me, the unforeseen can happen. Like crazy things can happen. Think about what you should not say. Think about what could get you upset. And think about how to really keep your composure, because some of these are really high stake, and your emotions and your chemicals are going to be firing off too. So plan for the unforeseen. And then really think about if this is a really intense conversation and it may start to go south or get heated, always have kind of a plan B to exit the conversation. So you could say something like, I know this is a lot to take in today. So what I'd like you to do is take the night to think about it, and we'll reconvene tomorrow and we'll finish going through the options so that we can get to an agreement. So think about a couple of good closing lines based on the situation. So if things go south, you can easily get out of it without it being awkward for you or for that person. All right, then we want to rehearse. So we went through a lot, right? There's a lot of pieces to think about this. And again, I don't want you to forget, don't get overwhelmed by all these questions or these pieces. Just know that these are tools so that you can piece together your conversation. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes and the less you're going to need some of this. But it's really important to use it as you're getting more comfortable. So let's talk about rehearsing. It's all about the opening line. And in fact, before we got on, Jen Griffin and I were talking about this, and she's like, don't forget to talk about the opening line because this is really where it's at. So how many of you have sat down with someone who is your boss and they're going to try to influence you or talk to you about something, and you were like, why are we here? Like you had no clue why you were there. They were stumbling over their words. And the whole time you can't hear them. Your brain's just going through like the last 2 weeks of your life. Like, did I say something? Did something go wrong? Like, you don't even know, right? And while you're doing that, you can't hear that other person. Has anyone ever sat down with their boss and had no idea why they were even there? And all they could think of was like, I don't even know. I just don't. Has that happened to anyone? Put yes in the chat box if you've ever had that situation happen to you. Yes, absolutely. Too many times. So don't be that person because you're in this class, so you're not going to be that person. So your opening line is critical. You have to tell people why you're there. So that could sound like, I want to sit down today with you because we have scholarships due. And I want to go through my thoughts on the scholarships, the research I've done so that you and I can make a good decision, a solid decision today. And then you can go through your conversation to see how very early you told someone why you're there and what the outcome could be. It could also sound like, I know that this project's been really difficult. And because of the difficulties, collectively, imagine a whole team of people around you, collectively, it's been tough on our relationships. So today, we're going to talk about how we're going to work together. And at the end of this, we're going to be a stronger team. Again, why we're here, what's going to happen at the end. That opening line couldn't be more important. There could be a million of them. And so if you really need to get a good opening line, you can throw your situation in the little chat box and I can throw you some ideas for a good opening line. But how many people really think about that opening line being why we're here and how we're going to end? Has that crossed your mind as much as it should? Yes or no? And throw that in the chat box. No. So yeah. So somewhat, yeah. So Teresa, no, right? That opening line, if you take nothing else from today, take away opening line, because the opening line reduces the fear in that person and allows them to focus on what you're saying because they're not going through the Rolodex of the last 2 weeks of their life. And so really making sure you have that opening line is going to be critical for everyone. All right. And again, think of conversations as a loop, start with the end in mind, and don't leave that person confused on why they are there. So rehearse, rehearse, rehearse the opening line. And we talked a little bit about this. It's okay to combine approaches. Don't be afraid. You may think about the conversation, especially if you're maybe working with a group. You may tell the group, why we're here today is we're going to change our logistic partners and our vendor who delivers all of our product. I know that that scares us all. I know that's going to be some lifting for this team, but at the end of it, here's why. And we're going to do it because we're going to save X amount of dollars that we can reinvest or whatever reason why. And so at the end of this, I want you guys to see the value of this. Then you can inspire, right? Tell the value. And then you can start to say, what does that mean for everyone? And so you can change the approach. And at the end, there may be some compliance. And at the end, there's definitely a commitment. So when you think about your approach, don't be afraid to take those approaches and kind of space them out, how you've structured that conversation. It really will make a difference in how the end comes out. So good. Awesome. So Christine, I have a great team that is dysfunctional when working together on certain projects. Would love an opening line for the meeting where we address this. Ooh, good one. All right. So everyone think of a good opening line. If you have one, throw it in the chat box, help Christine out. I'm going to think of one for Christine. All right. So you could say something like, you guys are a dream team. And when I think about the dream team, you are my dream team. From time to time, we're dysfunctional when we work together on certain projects. And I want that to stop. I want it to be a place where we are functional every single day. So today we're going to talk about our habits that create dysfunction. We're going to get really honest with those. And at the end, my hopes is that we are functional more often than we're dysfunctional. And then that will lead in. So how do you think about that, Christine, or anyone else? You can take that or, make a new one, but that's the one that came to my mind for a great opening line. Because again, what you did in that opening line or what I did is I truth told. You're a great team, but at times we're dysfunctional. You got to truth tell because that's the only way to make change, is if people know the truth. Oftentimes we expect people to make change, but we don't tell them the truth. And so, what are we going to do? Writing notes, that's a great one. Good. And you're going to get the recording. So you can just fast forward to this section. Let's see, we're 52 minutes in, and pick it up from there if you need it. So Jen, I like to acknowledge that what they do well, but then pivot to clear honesty around what the opportunity is. Absolutely. So sometimes you can say, here's what we're doing well. Here's our gaps. And today we're going to talk about the gaps, but we're going to leverage what we do well to fix those gaps. Because remember, you can never be someone you're not. Always leverage what you're already good at to fill in those gaps. Good. Anyone else have comments around combining approaches or opening lines? Throw it in the box and we will look at it. All right. So here's an important part, and everyone talks about debrief, but I'm going to tell you why debrief is important. And it's on page 26, and there's some questions and all that. But here's why debrief is important. If you want to be more influential and less directive, you're going to have to rewrite your neural pathways, right? So if you're constantly direct, then your brain is lazy. It takes the fastest path to success that it knows, right? So it's going to keep taking that path. If you're going to rewrite it, not only do you have to practice and purposely do it, you're going to have to acknowledge it. And we don't do enough of acknowledging our progress, because sometimes it's hard to see our own progress, which is good to work with a coach. I often acknowledge progress in people in our sessions that they didn't see themselves. Like, you have to acknowledge that, because it tells your brain that this is a good path and we have to stay on that. So when you debrief, think about what worked during the conversation. What skills did you develop? Where did you do well? And how do you take that and do even better next time, so that more conversations or your conversations continue to influence? And then if you didn't achieve your goal, what are the next steps? Which we talked about that. If it doesn't happen, do you just start over? And sometimes you have to start over and find a new approach. And it's important that we continue to think about what we did. What was the impact? What did we learn? How did we succeed? Even if it was a smidge, because a smidge is better than nothing. And if we failed, what did we learn? That's okay too. But that work, that debrief, is about helping you rewrite your neural pathways so that you can use them more often and you can become a more influential leader. All right, so we're closing in. So Lindsley, what would you do if all you hear is what you tell them they do well, and despite being direct, what needs to change? I don't know if I okay. What do you do if all they hear is what you tell them? I don't know if I understand your question completely, Lindsay. Let's see, and despite being direct and what needs to change. And then you may have to go a little bit more compliant with that, or you may have to role model and say, here's what good looks like. Let's talk about how we get there. Because sometimes people don't do what you want them to do because they actually don't know how. And that's okay, because, that's as leaders, we have to teach them. So maybe the opening line is, so in the past, when we've done this, we haven't quite met the mark. Today, we're going to talk about what needs to change so that we meet the mark. And we're going to commit as a group to do that, because we're not going to miss it anymore. All right, let's talk about that. And again, that kind of opens them up to know. So Deborah, set expectations around the change. Absolutely. All right, so here we are closing in. I wish we could break out in rooms and practice this and do all kinds of stuff. We would have so much fun. I'd keep you here for hours, but I won't do that. It's a Friday afternoon, which I thank you for showing up on a Friday afternoon. So what we're going to talk about is a behavior change model. We learned some new skills and competencies today, right? You learned very specific skills, and those are building on your leadership competencies. We're going to talk about questions and talk about approach, or about application, because that's an important part too. So don't forget to do your self-coaching questions. Do those within 24 hours while this is fresh in your brain, right? And while you can feel it and think about it, and all those things are firing and your brain's working overtime, do the mental work during that time. Then I also want you to think about, how do you apply it? Because if you want to change your behavior, you've learned the skills and you've learned the competencies. Now you have to mentally get it on board of doing this, and then you have to practice. So one of the things I want you to do, and I'm going to ask you about this next Wednesday when we come to the class, which Wednesday is my favorite, by the way, guys. It's my favorite module we're going to do. But when we think about your conversations over the next few days, think about what percentage are directive and what percentage are you influencing. When you stop and do this, you will be surprised how often you're directive. I know when I've done this exercise, I have to do, like, I'm all about maintenance, right? So about every 6 months, I kind of have to do one of these, and I have to stop and think about that because I see myself getting more directive over time, and I have to pull it back and start to influence. Identify a conversation you need to have that will require influence. And all of you thought of that conversation at the beginning. So think of it, use the worksheets to plan and prepare, and then have it. And don't forget to debrief, because debrief is the way you create the new neural pathways. And then, as always, if you want this to stick, you have to share it with at least one other person. So find someone today or Monday or over the weekend and take your workbook and go, look what I learned, and talk to them about it. Because when you reteach, you will start to own that material. It'll become part of who you are. And that's how you, again, create behavior change. All right, so we had one question. Please send an email for direct request. All right, perfect, yeah. And those who need SHRM certifications for this class, Chelsea's going to drop the link so you can pick up the certificate for your recertification hours. And if you need anything or need that link again, you can always email me directly. We are happy to share it with you. All right, so before we jump into questions, we're coming to an end. I want to remind you guys to come back on Wednesday. We're going to talk about conversation agility. And this is going to, again, kind of close the loop. We talked about hearing fear in yourself and managing that fear in your own mind. We talked about influencing others, reducing their fear, and allowing them to collaborate. Then we're going to talk about conversation agility on Wednesday, and that's the ability to start to really hear people's fears, redirect, refocus, reframe those conversations so that they can see what's possible for them. You're going to help them expand their mind map, but you can't do that directively. You have to lead and influence through that. All right, so that is what we'll do next Wednesday. So if you have friends you want to invite, you can still invite them. They can still register. Your replay links will come out this afternoon, and those will be live for you until the end of May. And so with that being said, those of you that have to say goodbye, your lunch and learn may be over, then it was great to have you. Those who want to stay on for Q&A, I will stay on with you, and hopefully we'll have some fun questions and maybe try some good opening lines. So yeah, so here we are. Oh, Karen, good. I'm so glad you enjoyed this workshop. Yes, thank you to all of you guys. I appreciate it. And then if you have a question, drop it in the box and we will start Q&A time. Oh, Kenny, so good to see you, Kenny. Thank you for coming. You're fantastic. And give your little puppies kisses for me because they're just so cute. All right, good. All right, so Q&A time. Let's think about what we want to think of or go through. So one of the things that I think hold people back from influence is fear. And so what I want you guys to think about around fear is we don't know the outcome, right? When we're going into an influential conversation, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But when we're directing people, we can make assumptions around the outcome. I told them to do it, therefore they should do it. And so oftentimes we set in directive leadership because we're too afraid of the unknown. And so that's what I'd like you guys to also think about when you're using these techniques. Get okay with not knowing the outcome. Remember yesterday when we talked about, or Wednesday when we talked about asking questions you don't know the answer to? Get comfortable influencing for an outcome that you don't know exactly what it will look like. Because you never know, that outcome may be better than you ever imagined because you were creating a collaborative conversation versus telling someone what to do. When you approach it more collaboratively, the ideas are coming because fear goes down. And I will tell you, so often we don't have the right idea as a leader, but the people on our team do. And if we don't create conversations where they can tell us their great ideas, then we're going to miss out on opportunity. One of the stories that a client recently told me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to use this example in my workshops. So we were talking about truth telling in the workplace. It's an executive who's struggling with people to tell him the truth, and he's trying to figure it out. And so I was talking to him about creating truth telling, and he's like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of the time. And so it wasn't his company, but someone he knows. They had this amazing marketing strategy. They spent $3 million on it. And what they were going to do is at the movies and the little pre-show, they were going to have, like a text, this to whatever number, and they were going to get a free coupon back. And they spent $3 million on this marketing campaign, and they were excited. They bought tons of ad space, and it was awesome. And so the first weekend those ads go out and the movies are playing, and then the next morning they're all waiting for it to come back in the numbers, and they're dismal, like basically no one. And some person on the team raised their hand and said, well, in the movie theaters, everyone's told to turn off their phone. It's rude to text, so why would they text? Really? You couldn't have told us at the beginning of this? But they didn't create an environment where that person could tell them ahead of time how things were going to go wrong. And it was a $3 million mistake of not telling the truth. That happens all of the time in the workplace. So that's my truth telling news story that a client recently shared with me. All right, any other questions, comments, any type of question you have, even if it's not about this, if it's about leadership, I'm happy to answer it. If not, then I'm going to let you guys enjoy your Friday afternoon. Oh, good. I'm so glad you guys are having a good time. I'm going to give you just a few minutes just in case. I wish Zoom had little type bubbles so I knew if someone was typing or not. Let's see. Alexandra, is it fair to ask the individual how they'd like to receive the information? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you asked that. So sometimes you have to say to someone, from time to time, you and I are going to have conversations that are very business focused. And I want to make sure I'm always having them in a way that feels good for you. If I have to come to you with difficult information, how would you like me to deliver it? Let them tell you. And then say, all right, so I hear that. Let's see what that would actually sound like. Let's make something up. The product didn't get delivered and it didn't come in time. The samples didn't arrive in time for our PR events, right? So that's very bad news. So you could play with that person and say, here's how I would deliver it based on what you told me. Is that how you really want me to deliver it? Because I just want to make sure you know what that looks and feels like. And we have agreed to that. And so it's about contracting and then actually playing it out, because people will always say, oh, just lay it on the table. Tell me the truth. And they get mad when you do that. So you have to kind of play with some examples to make sure that you know exactly what they mean when they say that. And that's a great way to build fantastic relationships. Perfect. Yes. Didn't consider a quick role play. Yeah. Play it out. And then Diana, what if the head of the org only wants directive communication, no room, space for collaborative conversations? It happens. I wish I could say it doesn't. It happens a lot. And depending on how close you are to that person, sometimes you may have to influence them. And you may say something like, I know that this has been a tough quarter. And because it's a tough quarter, you're really directive. And I get, you're the CEO, you have to be that way. But to get the best out of me right now, and for me to be able to deliver the strategy for you, I want to talk about changing up our conversation so that we get better results at this in this company, because that's what I want for you, and I want for me, and I want for everyone. I want better results. So let's talk about how we can adapt some of our communication so that we improve our results. He or she may say, sure, or heck no, or something in between, but at least you tried. And leadership is being brave, and leadership is trying, and leadership is getting through those roadblocks, whether you go over or under or through or around. And sometimes you have to say something like that. Now, you can't just say to that person, like, don't be so directive, like you're mean. That's not going to work. But you can say, to get better results, can we talk about how we influence in a different way? Because I think we're missing results because of how we're communicating. So let's see, Teresa, always practice hard conversations in the mirror. Great. Yes, Teresa, definitely do that. That's such a great tip. I love that. Yes. And again, collaborative learning. I love the chat box. I could never just sit here and talk to the screen without you guys being here with me. All right. Well, it was exciting to see you guys and to spend time with you, especially going into a weekend. Remember, if you need any help with your leadership development, talent strategies, plans, we are here to support you. If you have any questions about the workshop or things we discussed, email me. I will return your email. I return every single email I get about Leading Edge myself. And so engage me in conversation. I'd love to talk to you. And I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. And I will see all of you next Wednesday. Have a good one. Thanks, guys.